Hey everyone, welcome to Broken Lord Order. Today's mod is one I wanted to look at for a while now, but it was only recently just re-updated, so it is good to go again. I am speaking of Ultimate Skaven by Steel Blade. So kick back, grab a drink, and let's get into it.
Wow.
So what does this mod do? Well, kind of like the Doom compilation that we looked at originally, this is a pretty dramatic overhaul of the Skaven factions. This adds in new lords, new units, new mounts, new buildings, a bunch of new stuff. Some of the bigger changes that this makes, though, is this makes the Skaven a lot more lore accurate. So their economy is now slave dependent, as it should be. That's what Skaven economy is all about. And then on top of that, too, you also have the ability to overload certain units. If you're unfamiliar with the tabletop, overloading was what actually allowed the Skaven to have such dramatic amounts of power increases. But the risk of that was that you blew up your units by accident as a result of basically pushing them past their limits. This mod basically takes that same mechanic and puts it into the game as it always should have been. It was kind of weird that CA implemented the Skaven without implementing that particular facet of them. That being said, we'll take a deeper dive into some of the stuff this adds now. So why don't we start with some of those war machines that we just spoke about, and we'll work our way back down the tech tree from there. So your artillery platforms can now be overloaded, and they can also be intentionally blown up. If say you've got your artillery platforms surrounded by enemies and there's no way in hell you're going to be able to save them, well, just click on that overload button and take everything else with you. They can, like I said, overload their weapons for surge in power, but at the cost of blowing themselves up, possibly. And on top of that, too, they now each one has a second higher tiered option of it, which is a battery, which you essentially get a whole bunch of them rather than just one. Bunch of other mods have done this. I'm sure you've seen it before. It's not all that unique to this one in particular. Moving our way down to ranged units, we have a new one in the Doom Rocket Brigade, which is kind of a long range, almost sniperish. I guess mortar would be a more accurate term for them. Mortar style units. You can, well, exactly what you would expect a mortar to do. You can essentially launch explosives at very, very long range against your enemies, but they're not exactly the most accurate thing in the world. Your weapons teams can now also end up on the walls, as again, they always should have been able to. And on top of that, while not necessarily a ranged unit, the Warlock Engineer can be given new mount options that help flesh them out, especially when they're hanging out with a bunch of ranged units. Next up on beasts, we've got the Rat Ogre Destroyers, which are essentially bigger, badder versions of the Rat Ogres, as you would probably expect. Skaven Wolf Rats, which essentially act like hounds for other units, but, in this case, the rats. And then finishing it all out, you have the Murder Lord, who is a Master Assassin. They're kind of cool in the sense that they're really, really strong in direct hand-to-hand combat, but they're also bad for your army. They actually lower the leadership of all your units. So you have this unit that can just immediately take out particular targets, no problem, but who is a natural detriment to everyone else out around him. And I really liked that aspect of it. It's not something you see very often in lore choices. Now, we'll get into the slavery mechanic in depth in just a second, but before we do that, I just wanted to briefly touch upon the tech tree. So, for one thing, a lot of these really, really good units, or, even the good units from the base game, are now sort of pushed behind the great clans. So, in the base game, you have basically five techs that are essentially, promoting, either upkeep reductions or, basic primitive bonuses for your units. Well, in this one, they actually add in a second tier, which actually will lock certain units behind the Great Clans mechanic, which I really thought was a cool touch. It's actually something I was really hoping CA would help separate out more from the game, but that so far we haven't seen yet. Alright, so then finishing out on the most uncomfortable topic for a white guy to discuss, slavery. um, as said, this is sort of the focal point of their economy in this mod. It's actually a pretty dramatic change. And in a cool turn of events, I'd say it's actually a better version of it than what the Dark Elves get. Kind of like the Dark Elves, of course, you still get them from post battles, you can get them from raiding and all that kind of stuff. But unlike the Dark Elves, you can actually specifically push to try and get bonuses from slaves, and there's also a balance to be added between how much slavery you utilize in your cities as opposed to not. And it sounds like, one of those simple things, whatever, bonus slaves means bonus income. And normally there's a malice penalty associated with that, and there still is in this. But you have to remember that the Skaven are actually effectively balancing two happiness malices in their cities. The slavery itself will, of course, be a negative when it comes to happiness, but also their food, right? Skaven naturally tend to run pretty unhappy in their cities. It's a pretty distinct balancing act to make sure that your cities aren't actively revolting at you at any given time. Adding slavery into the mix makes that an extremely, extremely precarious balance, and it plays into the mod really, really well. At no point do you ever feel like, despite all this new stuff you've gotten, that you're in any danger of running away with the game. Like, you're always watching your back to make sure none of your cities turn against you at the last second. So balance then, and compatibility. For balance, this is actually a better balance than you would probably think it would be. Like I said, despite all these extra units you're getting, none of them are really like overpowered in their own. I mean, the batteries are definitely quite a bit more powerful than the individual artillery platforms, but they're also exceedingly expensive to get. And like I said, even if you're probably a little bit stronger in battles, you are leashed back so many different ways in the campaign that it's super, super difficult to prevent yourself from spiraling out of control. You need to actually be paying attention to what you're actually doing. And then compatibility. How compatible is this with other mods? Surprisingly pretty good, actually. Even stuff that also works with what this would be affecting, things like the tier 4 minor settlements mod, or getting rid of loyalty, or various other things. Still, actually, I also use a food mod, for example, which this mod is also affecting, and yet the two of them play nice, a-okay. Compatibility is strangely quite good on this. So then, conclusion time. Should you get this? Absolutely. This is one of those ones that makes the Skaven a lot more interesting to play. Now, whether or not you continue to use it will be more of a personal choice, because I would say that this actually makes them quite a bit more difficult to play with from a campaign perspective. But at least when versing them, you have a lot more unit variety, and actually makes them a little bit more difficult to take down, which also seems very lore accurate to what they are. But anyways, that's going to wrap it up for this one. Down the road, I'm actually hoping to take a look at Steelblade's Ultimate Chaos mod, which is the first version that he did of one of these. It's actually a little bit even bigger than this one is, in the sense that it has unique lords, plural, units, and a bunch of other stuff, typically centered around Monogob themes. So you have Khornate units, Nurglish units, Laneshi, and Sinchian. If that one gets updated down the road, we'll definitely take a look at that one too. But in the meantime, it's going to wrap it up. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.